From the book of Matthew. Stop collecting treasures for your own benefit on earth, where moth and rust eat them, and where thieves break in and steal them. Instead, collect treasures for yourselves in heaven, where moth and rust don't eat them, and where thieves don't break in and steal them. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Stewardship season. We get to talk about money, or we could talk about sex, which would probably be easier. You know how it is with money. We just don't go around, turning to the person next to us in the pew and saying, well, this is how much I make, and I just bought a new car, and this is how much it costs. But that would be unseemly, at least in the culture that many of us grew up in. We don't talk about those things. Probably for some good reasons and some bad reasons. And stewardship season, it seems to me, is this opportunity for us to talk about some of the things that we're not supposed to talk about. As I look out over this crowd, if I think about this congregation, I couldn't even kind of begin to know where each and any one of you might place yourselves on the economic ladder. I would guess that we have people that are very, 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 very well off, and we have some people who are just getting by. And even if people on that scale are not in this congregation, they are right out on the street, passing us by, or we're passing them by, day by day by day. So I can't really tell you much about where you are or where you should be about money, but I guess I could kind of place myself economically. And I'm really glad that Tom was able to do his stewardship message before the sermon, because it was a perfect setup for me to confess that actually I am kind of attracted to gizmos that Apple makes. I love my iPhone. I have a pair of Bose noise-canceling head earphones that I use on long trips on airplanes. My laptop is like my very best friend. When Chin and I replaced our futon, we got the deluxe model, which is actually pretty expensive. Actually, I'm just sharing some things that I've spent money on. It turns out that I don't have very many. This isn't going to be a long slideshow. So it's both a confession that I have spent some money on stuff, including Apple Gizmos, and it's also a kind of a pat on the back that I feel like I haven't bought too many. Now, this is actually a picture of the windows. We ended up spending a fair amount of money replacing 5 windows in the front of our apartment because we live right on Telegraph Avenue. And they were leaky windows, and we did it for, of course, environmental reasons, but also to block out the sound from the street, and they really work. And I have one of those standing desks. You press the button, it goes zzz, and you press the button, and it goes zzz. It's very cool. You'll notice, again, as kind of a confession, you notice I didn't bother to clean up the desk before I photographed it. Now, my car. None of you will be impressed by my car. As a matter of fact, I'm a little bit ashamed of my car, and I had to take several photos. It doesn't even really work. You can't quite see the really big dent just behind the front wheel and the broken back window. I have been telling my friends that I imagine a day when I would own a car that was built in this millennium. And, just for full disclosure, Chin and I are talking about buying a new car, but this one we've been driving and letting it fall apart for a while now. Chin and I live in a relatively modest apartment, 1-bedroom apartment on Telegraph Avenue, but I also own 3 apartments in this building that I bought in relationship to interplay work. So we live in a little place, and I own some property, and some of it produces rent. So that's just a little bit of where I place myself. I chose early on in my career to work in the arts and to work in the church. Clearly, I was following no good vocational advice. But it was the right path for me. But I've spent most of my life kind of cobbling together working mostly as a freelance. I've always had at least 2 jobs, and oftentimes 3, to put things together. I'm trained as a graphic designer, so at various times to support my habit in the arts and in the church, I've done that kind of work, which I also enjoy. I have to say now, though, that I have these 2 jobs, and I get a salary from both jobs, and at the moment, it's not a bad salary. But I'm not at that place as a 62-year-old that that other of my peers might be in who've had long careers and perhaps have, done that thing that you do when you have long careers and maybe have a pension. Actually, Chin has a pension because he worked for the state. So he's lucky. He's sitting on the couch, on the futon that I showed you. It's like easy street for him. He's got a pension and health care. But for me, no. But I have to say that by kind of a fluke, I started preparing for my retirement a while back, and I'm working on it. I have no idea how much money I need because I don't know when I'm going to die. So I must confess that's a little bit of a money concern, a money worry. And, in this time when pensions are going, and everyone's kind of on their own, that could be a concern that others of you share. If you are Kit's age, I hope you are starting to plan your retirement now. This is the time, compound interest. I'll give you the lecture on compound interest after church if you want it. But now is the time to start thinking about it. Don't wait until you're old enough to imagine being old. Start now. So in stewardship season, the basic question is, how much money am I going to pledge for the next year? And it seems to me that regardless of where we fall on the economic ladder, the conversation, that internal conversation, because we don't seem to be having it as a group, I think we should be. I think we should sit around in circles and say, well, this is how much money I make, and this is how much I give, and should I be giving more, how? Because money is such a powerful thing in our lives. Shouldn't we have all the help we can get to know how to manage it, to know how to use it, to how to line it up with our faith and our values? Lining up where our treasure is and where our heart is. Dealing with our financial anxieties, our financial fears, trying to learn that our God is a God of abundance. Shouldn't be hanging around in groups talking about these things. No, we don't really. So the stewardship pledge thing becomes kind of a private conversation that we have with ourselves, maybe our family group. So what's the challenge? The challenge is to see where I am and where I might be. And is there space there? Now, I want to say something very clearly. And my hope would be that actually we would say this every Stewardship Sunday. Ultimately, your stewardship gift is, the value of it is not directly proportional to the size of the gift. That is part of our religious tradition. The story of the widow's mite. The widow gave just a little tiny bit of what she had. She gave was just a little tiny thing. But Jesus said, she gave. It's not like she gave. Some of you are just giving, but she gave. So it's not ultimately just about how big it is. So do not feel bad if your gift feels small. But still, the conversation is, what can I do? What should I be doing? Should I be challenging me? Now, I'm a great believer in incremental long-term giving. So the idea that I just set up something with my bank, it just goes out of my account even before I see it, this is another bit of wisdom. Do not, well, you can do whatever you want, but I've just found that if it just happens, I don't see it, I don't have to think about it every month, it just happens. That is a really good way to do it. And that incremental process of a little bit each month, it adds up in the end. And my pattern in this church. I've been involved in this church since 1977. My pattern has been to make a yearly pledge, to break it up by month. I started doing it automatically as soon as the banks did that. I grew up in a time before automatic withdrawals and deposits. That's how old I am, as are some of you. So my pattern has been, and like each year, I usually just bump that up a little bit. You know, each month I give a little bit more, and each year give a little, you know, so it starts to add up as time goes on. But here's the thing, this year the stewardship committee, not the staff, not the budget committee, the stewardship committee decided, we're going to go for it. We are going to try to raise $100,000 to $200,000 more than we have before from our pledges. And you know, the interesting thing, when I heard the stewardship committee say that, I'm on the committee, but that's not part of my job. When I heard that, I thought, sure, no problem. I mean, I just kind of felt this is a community that probably could do that if they're willing to step into the new. We know that we're poised, don't we? That all this stuff is happening and all this stuff is going to happen. And don't you want to be ready for it? And just think about churches as institutions and how they affect individuals and how they affect communities. I am assuming, tell me if I'm wrong, but I'm assuming that as each one of you goes out into the world, you are radiating something of your values as a progressive Christian in the world. Please tell me that that's true. So just think of the multiplying effect of being part of a community like this, where we come and we get fed and then we go out into the world and hopefully work for the kingdom of God. This church and other churches like it are doing nothing less than presenting an alternate view about the way the whole world could be. At a time, in my opinion, where the world needs an alternative way to see how the world can be. We are saying, you know, it's different from what the media says. It's different from what some politicians say. It's different from what certain groups say. We believe in the common good. We believe in the power of the Spirit to transform lives. We believe that everyone should have the opportunity for full life. I don't have to worry about a roof over my head or food to eat. I shop at Whole Foods. I don't blink at the total on the cash register machine, although I probably should. In the grand scheme of things, I am so rich. And you might be too. And so what is the challenge? How do we line up what it is that we believe? How do we invest in the institutions that we think are important? Is the church at the top of your list? It's a fair question to ask. Now, my guess is that in this congregation we have people who give generously to the church and also give generously to other organizations. I've heard people say, oh yeah, I probably give a tithe of my income, but it's like 5% to the church and 5% to other organizations. That's not unlike what I do. But is the church at the top of your list? That is a fair question to ask. Because you are here, and some of you have been here for a very long time. And you know what happens in this congregation. Lives are changed. I wandered into First Congregational Church of Berkeley in 1977, not too long after I'd moved to California to go to graduate school, just based on a recommendation from a friend. Gertrude Lesnini. How many of you have been around long enough to remember Gertrude? Of course, she grabbed me. She was the person at the time who found all the new people and pointed them in the right direction. I ended up in what it was used to call the Mayflower Room over here. Actually, I was having a conversation with Robin Kempster. I remember that from a long time ago. I've forgotten most other things, but I remember that. She asked me if I was UCC, and I didn't know what that meant. I thought it must have something to do with the university. I'd just come to UC Berkeley. I did not know what the UCC was. But here I had wandered into this church that was going to end up changing my life so dramatically and so radically and at so many different times in my life. If it weren't for this church, I would never have ended up doing that kind of stuff. I couldn't do that when I first started. I can tell you about the failures of my early banners. I can tell you how providential it was to end up in a denomination that was going to welcome LGBTQ people. I didn't know that at the time. I wasn't even out at the time. And this church, even though I've come and gone, has been a solid presence. It's always here. Boom. This is one of the things that we've invested in. Have you noticed that? We've invested in being here. Boom. We're not talking about moving to the suburbs. We're not. We've invested in this place. We've fortified it, and we've redone things, and we've painted, and we're not moving. We even spruced up part of it so we could rent it to someone who would give us money later on. So we could be right here, so as I wandered away and I could wander back. And people are wandering in and wandering out all the time. They know we're going to be here, this solid presence of God at this spot. This is a powerful place. And so I hope you will take the time to have that conversation. And maybe even if you're really nervy, you'll have the conversation with someone else. You'll get together with them. You'll sit quietly on a bench somewhere, and you'll very quietly confess, this is how much I make, and this is how much I give. And then your friend will say, well, this is how much I make, and this is how much I give. And the both of you will kind of go, oh. And then you will think about it, and then you'll talk about it, and then you'll challenge each other. Okay, so maybe you're going to have this conversation with an imaginary friend. I don't know. But I just invite you. Have the conversation, because this is the time. This is the time. The world needs it. We need to spread the radiating as far and as wide as we possibly can. I hope you'll look at your treasure and where your heart is and how those things are lined up. I hope you'll pray a little bit and then do what needs to be done. Amen.